They laughed the first time they saw the cabin because from the county road, it looked too small to matter. A 12 by 16 wooden box tucked between the pines, with a tin roof, a narrow porch, and smoke curling from a stone chimney, like one thin breath in the Montana cold. They said a man would have to be lonely, stubborn, or half out of his mind to leave a decent town behind and build something that tiny against the shoulder of Carter Ridge. They called it a fool's shelter. They said it would fold in the first serious storm. But the winter that proved them wrong did not arrive with noise at first. It came quietly, in the way the elk moved lower than they should have, in the way the wind stopped smelling like pine and started smelling like iron, and in the way Ethan Brooks stood outside with his German shepherd, Ranger, staring toward the mountains as if he could hear a warning no one else was willing to hear. Before the storm reaches that cabin, tell us where you are watching from in the comments, because stories about loyalty and courage always seem to travel farther than we expect. And if you believe that the quietest people sometimes carry the strongest hearts, subscribe and stay with us. This story begins with a man everyone misunderstood, a dog who never left his side, and a little cabin that was never built to impress anyone. Ethan Brooks had not moved to the mountains because he hated people. That was what the town liked to believe, because simple explanations were easier than honest ones. In town, people said he was a retired Navy SEAL who came back from war with too many secrets and not enough conversation. Some said he was hiding from memories. Others said he thought he was better than everyone else. A few softened the gossip by saying, he is probably just one of those military types who does not know how to live normal anymore. Ethan heard pieces of it at the feed store, at the gas station, and once outside the post office when two men stopped talking the moment he stepped onto the sidewalk. He never corrected them. He had learned long ago that a man could waste his whole life trying to explain himself to people who had already decided what they wanted to believe. So he paid for his supplies, loaded them into his old Ford pickup, and drove back toward the ridge with Ranger sitting upright in the passenger seat, eyes forward, ears alert, as if the dog had been assigned to guard the silence itself. The truth was simpler and harder than the rumors. Ethan had spent 15 years in the Navy, most of them in places where sleep came in pieces and every decision mattered. He had learned to read weather before satellites confirmed it, to ration food when there was no supply truck coming, to hear danger in a silence other men ignored. He had also learned what it felt like to come home and have everyone expect gratitude to erase exhaustion. People thanked him for his service at grocery stores and football games, then looked uncomfortable when he did not know what to say back. The cabin was not an escape. It was a place where his nervous system finally stopped bracing for impact. He built it after buying 8 acres of rough timberland nobody wanted because the road was steep, the winter access was unreliable, and the closest neighbor lived nearly 4 miles away. The realtor had laughed when Ethan asked about year-round access. "You planning to become a mountain man?" she asked. Ethan only said, "I am planning to build something that lasts." Every board in that cabin had a reason. The foundation was anchored deeper than anyone bothered to notice. The roofline was steep enough to shed heavy snow. The walls were insulated better than most houses in town. The little pantry behind the kitchen shelves held dry goods and sealed bins, water filters, medical supplies, radio batteries, canned soup, powdered milk, dog food, spare gloves, and enough fire starters to make an old survival instructor proud. Under the porch, covered in waterproof tarps, were split logs stacked by size and burn time. Behind the cabin stood a small shed with a generator, extra fuel stored safely, snowshoes, a handsaw, tow straps, and a satellite emergency beacon. From the road, it looked like a shack. Inside, it was a carefully built promise. Ranger understood that promise better than anyone. He was a broad-shouldered German shepherd with dark eyes, silver beginning to touch his muzzle, and the kind of quiet intelligence that made strangers lower their voices around him. He had once worked beside Ethan in military training and later in search and rescue support after Ethan left active duty. Ranger was retired now, though the word meant nothing to him. He still inspected every tree line. He still paused when the wind shifted. He still placed himself between Ethan and an approaching stranger without looking aggressive, only certain. Ethan trusted the dog more than he trusted most weather reports. On a clear October morning, Ethan and Ranger walked the ridge trail before sunrise. Frost silvered the grass. The sky over the eastern peaks glowed pale pink. Ethan carried a thermos of coffee and wore an old field jacket, while Ranger moved ahead, nose low, paws silent on frozen needles. Halfway up the trail, Ranger stopped. He looked downslope toward the valley, then back at Ethan. Ethan stopped too. For several seconds, nothing happened. No branch snapped. No animal bolted. No engine echoed from the road. But the quiet felt wrong. It felt pressed down, heavy, like the mountain was holding its breath. Ethan studied the treetops. A thin line of cloud sat where yesterday the sky had been clear. The air carried that sharp metallic bite he had noticed in cold desert nights before sudden weather turns. The elk tracks in the soft mud pointed lower than usual. The ravens were gone from the high snags. Yeah, Ethan said softly to Ranger. I feel it too. By noon, he was in town buying extra flour, propane canisters, batteries, and 2 new wool blankets. The bell above Dawson's Market rang as he stepped in, and conversations thinned the way they always did when people did not want to admit they had been talking about him. Ranger waited in the truck, visible through the window, his head high and his eyes following every movement. At the counter, Buck Harlan leaned on one elbow and smiled. Buck owned a plowing business, served on the county emergency volunteer board, and enjoyed being the kind of man who always had an opinion before he had information. He was tall, loud, and confident in a way that made uncertain. People feel safer around him. Stocking up again, Seal? Buck asked, looking at the bags. You building a grocery store up there in your treehouse? A couple of men near the coffee machine laughed. Ethan set a pack of batteries on the counter. Weather is shifting. Buck looked toward the front window where sunlight was still falling clean across Main Street. Weather shifts every week. That is why they call it Montana. This one feels different. Feels different, Buck repeated, drawing the words out for the room. Hear that, boys? We got a mountain prophet now. The cashier, a young woman named Abby, looked uncomfortable as she scanned Ethan's supplies. Ethan said nothing. He did not mind being laughed at. Laughter did not change the barometer. Claire Mitchell walked in just as Buck was telling everyone that Ethan's little cabin would probably blow halfway to Wyoming if the wind got serious. Claire was a ranch owner, 42, widowed young, with sun-browned hands and a calm voice that could stop a room without getting loud. She had known the mountains all her life and respected anyone who respected them back. Buck, she said, picking up a basket. When was the last time your plow truck made it past mile marker 7 in a real whiteout? Buck turned. That is because nobody needs to be dumb enough to live past mile marker 7. Claire glanced at Ethan. Maybe dumb is not the right word. Ethan gave her a small nod, paid for his supplies, and carried them outside. Claire followed a minute later with a bag of feed over one shoulder. I heard the jokes, she said. Most jokes are just fear wearing a better coat, Ethan replied. Claire smiled faintly. That sounds like something a man says after choosing not to punch somebody. I do not punch people over weather. That is good. Around here, you would run out of people by Christmas. For a moment, they both looked toward the ridge. A low bank of clouds had formed behind the peaks, darker now, almost blue at the bottom. Claire's smile faded. You really think something is coming? I think people should make sure they have what they need. I think they should check on older neighbors. I think nobody should be driving that road after the first heavy band hits. That's serious? Ethan looked at Ranger through the truck window. The dog was standing now, paws on the seat, staring toward the ridge. I hope not, Ethan said. But hope is not a plan. By that evening, Ethan had stacked the new supplies exactly where they belonged. He checked the generator, tested the radio, sealed the north window where a faint draft had been bothering him, and brought in 2 days' worth of wood. Ranger followed every step. When Ethan carried blankets to the loft, Ranger waited at the foot of the ladder. When Ethan walked outside to check the snow stakes along the driveway, Ranger moved beside him. The dog did not whine or pace. He was too disciplined for that. But his ears stayed forward, and his body held that quiet tension Ethan recognized. The first snow began after midnight. It was gentle, almost beautiful, falling straight down in the moonlight. Ethan stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching flakes gather on the railing. Down in town, most people would wake up and call it pretty. They would take pictures. They would laugh about how winter arrived early. Ethan knew better. The first inch did not matter. The pattern did. By morning, 6 inches covered the porch steps. By noon, the wind had turned. By 3 o'clock, the county weather alert changed from advisory to warning. Phones buzzed across town. The storm system had stalled over the northern Rockies and strengthened faster than forecast. By dark, the news was calling it dangerous. By the time people started taking it seriously, the mountain road was already becoming a white tunnel. Buck Harlan still told people not to panic. He stood outside the service station with his hands in his coat pockets, saying, "We have had storms before." Everybody calmed down, but his eyes kept moving toward the ridge. He had a plow truck parked behind his garage, a full tank of diesel, and the pride of a man who believed machinery could solve anything. He also had a wife, a teenage daughter, and an elderly mother who lived 2 roads over. For the first time all week, Buck wished he had listened instead of laughed. Claire listened. She spent the afternoon moving livestock closer to the barn, filling extra water troughs, and calling neighbors. At 5, she called Ethan. "Road is getting bad," she said. "Stay off it. I am at the ranch. I am fine. But there are 3 cars at the overlook lot. I saw headlights when I checked the north fence. Tourists, maybe. Maybe locals. They should not be there." Ethan's jaw tightened. The overlook sat beyond a curve where wind carved snow into dangerous drifts. "Did you call the sheriff?" "Line is jammed. I got through to dispatch once, but they are already dealing with accidents near town. They told me not to go after anyone." "Good. Do not." Claire was silent for half a beat. "Ethan, I mean it. That road is going to disappear. I know. That is why I called you." Ethan looked down at Ranger, who had lifted his head the moment Claire's voice changed on the phone. "I will check from my side," Ethan said. "If I cannot get eyes on them safely, I turn around. Promise me you will not do something reckless." Ethan pulled on his gloves. "Reckless is doing nothing when you can do something. Stupid is doing something without a plan. I am only interested in the first one." He ended the call before Claire could argue. Ethan did not drive. He knew better. A truck in those conditions could become another rescue problem. He strapped on snowshoes, packed a small emergency bag, clipped a light to Ranger's harness, and stepped into a world that had changed in less than an hour. Wind shoved snow sideways through the trees. The trail vanished every few yards. Ethan moved slowly, counting steps, checking landmarks, never letting emotion set the pace. Ranger moved ahead on a short lead, nose working, body low against the gusts. They reached the old logging cut after 25 minutes. From there, through breaks in the timber, Ethan could usually see the overlook road. That night, he saw only white. Then, faintly, one blink of red. A tail light. Ranger saw it too. His body stiffened. "Easy," Ethan said. The dog did not bark. He lowered his nose and pulled gently toward the road. They found the first vehicle wedged sideways near a drift, its hazard lights weak behind a crust of snow. Inside were a young couple from Idaho, terrified but uninjured, wrapped in thin jackets that had looked fashionable in town and useless on a mountain. Their phone had no signal. Their rental car would not move. The man's hands shook so badly he could barely unlock the door. "You Ethan?" the woman asked as if she had expected him and did not know why. "Yes. Take only what you can carry. Leave the rest. My cabin is less than a mile through the trees." "Is it safe?" Ethan looked at the blowing snow. "Safer than staying here." Ranger moved close to the woman, pressing his shoulder against her leg just long enough for her breathing to slow. She reached down with gloved fingers and touched his neck. "Good boy," she whispered, though her voice broke on the last word. They had gone only a few hundred yards when Ranger stopped again. This time he barked once, sharp and controlled, toward a slope beyond the road. Ethan lifted his light. At first he saw nothing. Then the beam caught movement near a ditch. A second vehicle had slid off the shoulder, nose down, half buried in snow. Inside were Buck Harlan, his wife Denise, their daughter Lily, and Buck's mother, Marion, who was wrapped in a blanket and breathing with difficulty. The plow truck that Buck trusted more than people had lost traction on a patch of ice hidden under powder. The front axle was stuck deep. The heater still worked, but the exhaust pipe was packing with snow. They had been minutes away from real danger. When Ethan opened the door, Buck stared at him as if shame had frozen him harder than the storm. "Do not say it," Buck muttered. "I was not planning to," Ethan said. "Is anyone hurt?" Denise answered before Buck could. "Marion has a heart condition. She has been anxious. We were trying to get her to our house before the road closed." Ethan checked Marion's pulse with steady fingers, asked clear questions, and made a decision. "We move now? Slowly. Everybody stays together." "Buck," You carry the medical bag from your truck if you have one. Denise, hold Lily's hand. I will support your mother. Ranger leads. Buck swallowed. You sure your place can hold all of us? Ethan looked at him for 1 second. Not unkindly. Tonight you should hope the answer is yes. The walk back was worse. The storm thickened until every tree looked like a ghost of itself. Marion could only take small steps. Lily cried silently, trying to be brave and failing because she was 16, cold, and scared. The Idaho couple followed close behind. Twice, Ethan stopped the group and made everyone turn their backs to the wind. Once, a gust knocked Denise to one knee, and Ranger immediately circled back, standing beside her until she rose. Halfway to the cabin, Buck's pride finally cracked. I am sorry, he said, though the words nearly disappeared in the wind. Ethan did not turn around. Save your breath. No, I mean it. I ran my mouth. About the cabin. About you. Buck, right now I need you to watch your daughter and keep walking. That was not forgiveness. Not yet. It was priority. Buck understood the difference, and for once, he said nothing. When the cabin lights appeared through the trees, Lily made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. The small structure glowed amber in the storm, smoke rising strong from the chimney, its roof holding firm under the weight of snow. To anyone who had mocked it, the cabin no longer looked small. It looked impossible. It looked like mercy. Ethan opened the door and brought them inside one by one. Warmth wrapped around them immediately. Not luxury. Not comfort in the soft, easy sense. Real warmth. Life-saving warmth. The fire burned low and steady. Kerosene lamps glowed on the shelves. Blankets waited in a cedar chest. A kettle was already on the stove because Ethan had filled it before leaving, knowing he might return with people who needed heat fast. The Idaho woman began crying the moment she sat down. Denise helped Marion into the chair nearest the fire. Lily stood in the middle of the room, staring at the pantry shelves, the stacked blankets, the radio, the hooks of organized gear, the extra boots lined by the wall. This is not a shack, she whispered. Buck heard her. His face changed. Ethan did not answer. He moved like a man back on a mission. He gave Marion warm water in small sips, not too fast. He checked her medication and made sure she had taken the right dose. He gave dry socks to the young couple, set their wet gloves near the stove, and told everyone to remove outer layers before the moisture stole more heat. Ranger walked from person to person, sniffing hands, accepting trembling touches, then placing himself near the door as if the storm might try to enter without permission. The radio crackled with broken updates. Power outages across the county. Multiple road closures. Dispatch overwhelmed. Plow crews pulled back until visibility improved. Ethan tried the sheriff's frequency, got only static, adjusted the antenna, and tried again. Carter Ridge cabin to county dispatch, he said. I have 6 civilians sheltered. 1 elderly female with a heart condition, stable at this time. No immediate extraction possible. We have heat, food, and medical supplies. Request status when available. Static answered first. Then a thin voice broke through. Carter Ridge cabin, this is dispatch. Copy 6 civilians sheltered. Be advised, all ridge access closed until storm weakens. Can you maintain overnight? Ethan looked around the room. Buck stared at him. Denise held Marion's hand. The Idaho couple sat shoulder to shoulder under a blanket. Lily watched Ranger as if the dog was the only thing keeping her fear from spilling over. We can maintain, Ethan said. That night, the storm did not pass. It grew teeth. Wind slammed the cabin hard enough to make the windows tremble. Snow hissed against the walls. Somewhere outside, a branch cracked under the weight, then fell with a muffled thud. Inside, 7 people and 1 dog listened to the mountains remind them how small human confidence could be. Ethan rationed the firewood by burn time, not mood. He cooked soup and biscuits on the small stove. He assigned everyone a place to sleep, then rotated people closer to the fire so Marion stayed warm without overheating. He kept the conversation calm, practical, and steady. No drama. No speeches. Fear had enough room already. He would not feed it. But silence has a way of forcing truth into the open. Near midnight, when the lamps had been turned low and most of the cabin had fallen into a strained quiet, Buck sat at the table across from Ethan. He looked older than he had that afternoon. Snow had melted into his hair and dried in stiff lines. His big hands wrapped around a tin mug he had not touched. You built all this yourself? Buck asked. Most of it. Claire helped haul stone for the chimney one weekend. A neighbor with a mill cut some beams. I paid him. I thought it was just. Buck stopped. A fool's shelter. Buck flinched. Yeah. Ethan looked at the fire. It is easy to call something foolish when you do not need it yet. The words were not angry. That made them harder to hear. Buck set down his mug. I made you a joke because it was easier than admitting I did not understand what you were doing. Ethan looked at him then. Ranger, lying near the door, lifted his head. Most people do that, Ethan said. Not just you. You do not hate us for it. Hate is heavy. I carried enough heavy things before I came here. Buck did not know what to say. For once, silence was the most respectful thing he had. Across the room, Lily was awake. She had heard every word. Later, she would remember that conversation more clearly than the storm, because it was the first time she saw her father ashamed in a way that did not make him smaller. It made him human. By morning, snow had sealed the door so tightly Ethan had to push it open with his shoulder. A wall of white met him at chest height. He shoveled a narrow path to the woodpile while Ranger stood on the porch, nose lifted. The dog suddenly turned toward the western tree line and barked. Ethan froze. Inside, Denise called, "What is it?" Ethan held up one hand without looking back. Ranger barked again, then pawed at the porch steps, urgent now. Ethan scanned the trees. At first, there was only snow moving between trunks. Then he saw something dark low to the ground. Not a person walking, something crawling. He grabbed the emergency bag and stepped off the porch. Ranger moved ahead, breaking trail through the drift. 50 yards from the cabin, they found Claire Mitchell on her knees in the snow, one arm wrapped around a boy of about 10 and the other clutching the collar of a small terrier mix. Her face was pale from cold, but her eyes were sharp. Found them near the north fence, she said, breathless. Their car slid off County 9. Parents are behind me. Father hurt his ankle. Mother is carrying the little girl. I could not get them all moving. Ethan did not waste a second on reprimand. Claire had done what he would have done. Reckless perhaps, but not stupid. She had a plan, and now the plan needed help. Ranger, Ethan said, pointing into the storm. Find. The old training came alive in the dog like a flame catching dry paper. Ranger surged ahead, nose down, then disappeared between the trees with Ethan close behind. Claire helped the boy to the cabin while Buck, seeing them from the doorway, grabbed his coat and came out without being asked. Tell me what to do, Buck said. Ethan pointed. Clear the porch. Keep the door accessible. Denise warms the child slowly. No hot bath, no rubbing skin. Warm blankets. Sweet drink if he can swallow. Buck nodded once and ran. For the first time since Ethan had known him, Buck did not try to lead. He tried to help. Ranger found the family near a stand of bent aspens. The father, Carlos Ramirez, sat in the snow with his back against a tree, jaw tight from pain, one boot twisted at the ankle. His wife, Maria, held a little girl under her coat, murmuring prayers and comfort in English and Spanish, her voice shaking but gentle. Their sedan had gone off the road nearly half a mile away after another vehicle forced them wide during the whiteout. They had followed a fence line because they saw a faint light they thought might be a house. They were wrong about the house. They were right about the light. Ethan assessed Carlos's ankle, stabilized it with a wrap and a splint from his pack, then helped him stand. The man tried to apologize for being a burden. Ethan stopped him. Your job is to put weight where I tell you and not be proud. Carlos laughed once despite the pain. My wife says that too. Then she is probably right most of the time. Maria gave Ethan a tired smile, and that small flash of normal humanity in the middle of the storm felt like a match struck in darkness. Getting them back took nearly an hour. Ranger walked point, returning again and again to check the slowest person. Claire, exhausted but stubborn, supported Maria. Ethan braced Carlos. Buck met them halfway with a rope line tied from the porch to a pine tree, then farther into the woods, a simple guide so no one would lose direction in the blinding snow. Ethan saw the knot work and looked at Buck with surprise. Buck shrugged, embarrassed. I listened when you talked about having a plan. Ethan nodded. Good work. Those two words did something to Buck that no apology could have done. They gave him a way forward. By noon, the cabin held 12 people, 2 dogs, and the weight of everything no one had said before the storm. It should have felt crowded. It did. Wet boots, damp coats, worried faces, bodies moving carefully around one another in the small room. But the cabin held. The stove held. The walls held. Ethan's systems held because he had planned not for comfort, but for need. He turned the loft into a sleeping area for the children. He used a tarp and spare rope to create privacy near the back wall for anyone changing out of wet layers. He asked Claire to help track food portions and medication times. He asked Buck to manage firewood and keep the porch clear. He asked Denise to sit with Marion and Maria because she had a warm, steady way of speaking that calmed people. Everyone had a task. Everyone became useful. Fear loosened its grip when hands had something meaningful to do. The storm trapped them there for 2 full days. During those days, the cabin became a small world. Outside was white chaos. Inside was soup, shared blankets, radio static, children's whispers, Ranger's steady presence, and the low voice of Ethan Brooks guiding people through a situation they never expected to face. At first, people avoided talking about how they had treated him. Gratitude was easier than confession. They thanked him for coffee, for socks, for checking the radio, for helping Carlos to the bathroom without embarrassing him. But the deeper apologies sat in the room like a chair nobody wanted to sit in. On the second evening, Lily brought it forward. She was sitting on the floor near Ranger, gently scratching the gray fur along his neck while the little Ramirez girl slept against Maria's side. The fire had settled into coals. Wind still shook the cabin, but not as violently. "My dad called this place a fool's shelter," Lily said suddenly. The room went still. Buck closed his eyes. "Lily." "He did," she said. "A lot of people did. I laughed too sometimes. Not because I really thought it was funny. Because everyone else laughed." Ethan looked at her, not with judgment, but with patience. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I am sorry. I did not know it was a place like this." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You only saw it from the road. That is not an excuse." "No," Ethan said gently. "But it is how most people see most things. From too far away." Claire looked down at her hands. Buck rubbed both palms over his face. Denise squeezed her daughter's shoulder. Lily whispered, "Why did you help us anyway?" The question was innocent, but it carried the shame of everyone in the room. Ethan took a long breath. His eyes moved to Ranger. The dog looked back at him, calm and certain. "Because help is not something people earn by being right about you," Ethan said. "Help is something you give because someone needs it and you are able to give it." No one spoke for a while after that. Some words do not need an answer. They need room to settle. Later, when the children were asleep and the adults were speaking softly, Claire stepped onto the porch with Ethan. The wind had weakened enough that they could stand outside for a minute, wrapped in coats, watching snow drift through the beam of the porch light. Ranger pressed against Ethan's leg. "You could have let them learn the hard way," Claire said. "They were already learning the hard way. You know what I mean." Ethan looked toward the buried road. "I spent too many years watching what happens when people decide someone deserves to suffer because they made a mistake. It never makes the world better." Claire studied his face. She had known Ethan for 2 years, but in that moment she realized she had only seen the outline of him. A quiet veteran. A prepared man. A good neighbor from a distance. But beneath that was something deeper than preparedness. There was grief refined into mercy. "You still miss it?" she asked carefully. "The Navy? The purpose?" Ethan watched Ranger sniff the snow along the porch rail. "Every day for a while. Then I learned purpose does not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it looks like splitting firewood before someone knows they will need heat. Sometimes it looks like keeping coffee ready. Sometimes it looks like opening the door for people who were not kind to you." Claire's eyes shone in the porch light. "That is a hard kind of peace. Most real peace is." On the third morning, the world changed again. The wind died so suddenly that the quiet felt almost unbelievable. The clouds lifted in pieces, revealing a sky so bright it hurt to look at. Snow covered everything in smooth, rolling waves. Trees bent under white weight. The road was still buried, but visibility had returned. The radio finally carried clear voices. Plow crews were moving. The sheriff's office had logged the cabin as a shelter point. A rescue team would reach them by afternoon. When the first snowmobile engines buzzed in the distance, everyone inside the cabin stood as if waking from a dream. Relief moved through the room, but so did something harder to name. Leaving meant safety. It also meant returning to a world where they would have to remember who they had been before the storm and decide who they wanted to be after it. Sheriff Tom Alvarez arrived with 2 deputies and a rescue volunteer. He stepped into the cabin, took in the crowd, the organized supplies, the patients stable near the fire, the children wrapped in blankets, the 2 dogs resting peacefully, and Ethan standing by the stove, as if hosting 12 unexpected dinner guests instead of managing a mountain emergency. The sheriff removed his hat. "Brooks, dispatch said you had people sheltered, but I did not expect half the county." "Only the part that does not listen," Claire said from the table. A tired laugh moved through the room, Buck included. Sheriff Alvarez looked at Ethan. "You saved us from a different kind of call." "More than one." Ethan shook his head. "They made it here. I just opened the door. You did more than that." Ethan did not argue, but he also did not accept the praise like something he wanted. He helped Carlos onto a sled for transport, handed Maria their bags, checked Marion one last time, and made sure the Idaho couple knew how to contact the rental company and the sheriff's office. Ranger watched every departure, calm but attentive, as if counting them back into safety. Buck was the last to leave. He stood on the porch beside Ethan while deputies secured the path. The mountains were almost painfully beautiful under the morning sun. For a man like Buck, who had built his life on being seen as capable, the apology was difficult. But the storm had stripped away performance. All that remained was truth. "I need to say it right," Buck said. Ethan waited. "I was wrong about you. Wrong about this cabin. Wrong about what strength looks like." Buck swallowed. "I thought because you were quiet, you were looking down on us. I thought because this place was small, it was weak. Truth is, I judged what I did not understand. Then I brought my family to your door, and you treated us better than we deserved." Ethan looked out at the snow. "You deserve to be safe." "So did they. Maybe. But I did not deserve your kindness. Kindness is not wages, Buck. It is not paid out after people behave perfectly." Buck's eyes reddened. He nodded once, hard, like he was trying not to break in front of another man. "What can I do?" Ethan looked at the buried road, the snapped branches, the long work ahead. "Start by checking on your neighbors before you check your pride." Buck gave a short, wet laugh. "Fair." Then he held out his hand. Ethan looked at it for a moment, then shook it. It was not a grand reconciliation. No music swelled. No speech followed. But on that porch, with snow still falling from the trees and rangers standing between them, something shifted. A man who had mocked finally listened. A man who had been mocked chose not to harden. Sometimes that is how a community begins healing, not with big promises, but with one honest handshake in the cold. By sundown, the cabin was quiet again. Quiet, but not the same. Ethan washed mugs, folded blankets, swept melted snow from the floor, and restacked supplies. The room carried traces of everyone who had been there. A child's mitten forgotten near the stove. A note from Maria thanking him for protecting her family. Buck's rope still tied to the porch rail. Claire's wool scarf hanging from a peg because she had insisted she would come back for it, and Ethan knew she had left it on purpose. Ranger moved slowly around the cabin, sniffing corners, then settled near the fire with a heavy sigh. The dog was tired. So was Ethan. For the first time in days, no one needed instructions. No one needed warming. No one needed rescuing. Ethan sat on the floor beside Ranger and rested one hand on the dog's back. "Good work," he said. Ranger closed his eyes. The story spread faster than Ethan wanted. By the next morning, people in town were calling it the Carter Ridge Shelter. By the end of the week, someone had posted a photo of the cabin online with the caption, "The fool's shelter that saved 12 people." Ethan hated the phrase, even when it was meant kindly. He did not want the cabin turned into a trophy against those who had been wrong. He wanted it remembered as a warning against judging too soon. But stories belong to communities once they leave the people who live them. At Dawson's Market, Abby refused to let Ethan pay for coffee for a month. At the feed store, men who once laughed now nodded with embarrassed respect. Some overcorrected, calling him hero in a tone that made Ethan look away. Buck stopped telling jokes at Ethan's expense. More importantly, he started showing up. The first Saturday after the storm, Buck drove to the base of the ridge with a truckload of firewood. Ethan met him at the turnout. "You lost." Buck smiled, but there was humility in it now. "No. Thought maybe you could use this. I have wood." "I know. This is not because you need it. It is because I need to bring it." Ethan considered that, then nodded. "Follow me up. Stay in low gear around the second switchback." Buck did exactly as told. That was the beginning of a different season on Carter Ridge. People came, not in crowds, but in honest ones. Claire came with extra canned vegetables from her pantry and helped Ethan. Expand the storage shelves. Buck brought firewood and later helped repair the shed roof. Sheriff Alvarez asked Ethan to advise the county volunteer team on remote shelter planning. Maria and Carlos visited with their children and a pan of homemade enchiladas, and Carlos insisted on limping carefully up the porch steps without help because, as he said, "This time I want to arrive standing." Ethan welcomed them all, though attention still sat awkwardly on his shoulders. He answered questions when asked. He taught what he knew without making anyone feel foolish for not knowing it sooner. He showed families how to build emergency kits for their cars, how to store water without wasting money, how to read weather alerts, how to prepare for power outages, and how to check on elderly neighbors before conditions became desperate. Preparation is not fear, he told a group gathered in the community hall one cold evening. Fear panics at the last minute. Preparation cares in advance. There is a difference. People wrote that down. Ranger became a quiet celebrity. Children who once saw him only through Ethan's truck window now asked permission to pet him. Ranger accepted their attention with dignity, leaning into the gentlest hands. Ethan taught them how to approach a working dog respectfully, even a retired one. Trust is not something you grab, he would say. You offer calm, and you let trust come to you. Claire heard that and smiled because she knew he was talking about more than dogs. Spring came slowly. Snow withdrew from the lower slopes in dirty patches. Meltwater ran under ice and sang in hidden places. The cabin roof dripped all afternoon. Ethan repaired the trail markers and cleared fallen branches. One evening, Claire arrived with a wooden sign wrapped in a tarp. "The town made this," she said. "That sounds dangerous." "Only emotionally." She unwrapped it. The sign was simple, hand-carved, and sanded smooth. It read, "A place where no one stands alone." Ethan stared at it longer than Claire expected. "Too much?" she asked. He shook his head, but his voice came slowly. "I do not know what to do with people being grateful. Maybe you do not have to do anything with it. Maybe just let it exist." He ran his thumb over the carved letters. "The cabin did what it was built to do." "No," Claire said gently. "You did. The cabin helped because you cared before anyone asked you to." Ethan looked away toward the tree line. Ranger stood beside him, old eyes following the movement of a squirrel somewhere under the branches. "I was not always good at caring where people could see it," Ethan said. Claire's voice softened. "You are better at it than you think." They mounted the sign by the door that evening. Ethan held it steady while Claire drove the screws into the wood. Ranger sat at the foot of the steps like a supervisor. When they finished, the three of them stood back and looked at the cabin in the gold light before sunset. For years, Ethan had thought of the place as small because that was the point. Small meant manageable. Small meant quiet. Small meant fewer things to lose. But looking at the sign, he realized small places could hold large meanings when people brought their fear, gratitude, shame, relief, and hope through the same door. The cabin had not changed size. His understanding of it had. Ranger slowed as autumn returned. Not all at once. At first, he simply took longer to stand after naps. Then his walk shortened. Then Ethan noticed him pausing halfway up the ridge trail, pretending to sniff something so Ethan would not know he needed rest. The dog who had once cut through snow like a blade now moved with careful dignity, still proud, still alert, but undeniably older. Ethan adjusted without making a ceremony of it. He moved Ranger's bed closer to the fire. He bought softer food. He shortened their walks and sat more often on fallen logs so the dog could rest without feeling left behind. He knew aging was not failure. He knew it in his head. His heart resisted anyway. Winter came again, but this time the town met it differently. Nobody mocked Ethan for stocking supplies. Nobody laughed when Claire reminded people to check batteries. Buck's plow truck carried emergency blankets and thermoses. Dawson's Market placed a shelf near the entrance labeled Winter Basics, and Abby taped Ethan's checklist beside it. The mountains were still the mountains. Storms still came. Roads still closed. But people no longer mistook luck for readiness. One December night, snow began falling hard, and for a few minutes the old memory returned. Ethan stood on the porch watching the white gather on the trees. Ranger stood beside him, leaning more weight against Ethan's leg than he used to. Down in the valley, one light after another glowed in homes where families had stocked wood, checked generators, and called neighbors before the weather became dangerous. Ethan looked at the lights and felt something unfamiliar move through him. Relief, maybe, or belonging. He had come to the ridge because he believed distance would protect what was left of him. But the cabin had taught him the opposite. Healing had not come from keeping the world outside. It had come from deciding which parts of the world were worth opening the door for. Ranger nudged his hand. "I know," Ethan said. Inside, the dog huffed softly, as if he had been the one suggesting wisdom all along. The years that followed did not turn Ethan into a different man. He remained quiet. He still preferred sunrise to crowds, wood smoke to town meetings, and Ranger's company to most conversations. But he no longer mistook quiet for absence. He attended community suppers when Claire insisted. He helped Sheriff Alvarez train volunteers. He repaired a widow's porch before the first freeze. He taught Buck's daughter how to splint an ankle for a wilderness first aid course. He let people know him in pieces, and for Ethan, that was no small thing. Ranger remained at the center of it all. When children visited, he watched them with patient eyes. When veterans came up the ridge, he rested beside the ones who spoke least, as if recognizing something familiar in their silence. When Claire sat on the porch after a long day at the ranch, Ranger placed his chin on her boot until she reached down and scratched behind his ears. "He knows when people are carrying something," Claire said once. Ethan looked at the dog. He always did. Near the end of Ranger's life, the old dog loved the porch most. He would lie where sunlight crossed the boards and watch the valley with the same serious expression he had carried as a younger dog. His hearing faded, but somehow he still knew when a truck turned onto the ridge road. His legs weakened, but he still tried to stand when visitors arrived. Ethan would place a hand on his back and say, "Easy, partner. They know you are on duty." Everyone did. It was Ranger who taught him how to accept being needed without running from it. Dogs do not admire speeches. They do not care about rank, reputation, old mistakes, or public praise. Ranger cared whether Ethan got up in the morning, whether he ate, whether he walked, whether he opened the door when someone knocked. In that steady devotion, Ethan found a truth he had not learned in any training. Loyalty is not loud. It is repeated. Repeated in footsteps through snow. Repeated in coffee made for neighbors. Repeated in a hand on an old dog's back. Repeated in a cabin door opening, again and again. One clear evening, Ethan drove back up the ridge under a sky full of hard winter stars. Ranger slept in the passenger seat, his muzzle white now, his breathing steady. The cabin lights came into view through the trees, soft and gold. The sign beside the door had weathered but remained readable, a place where No. 1 stands alone. Ethan helped Ranger down from the truck and waited as the old dog took his time crossing the porch. Inside, the fire was ready to be lit. The shelves were stocked. The blankets were folded. The radio was charged. Everything had its place. Everything still meant what it had always meant. Ethan knelt beside Ranger before opening the door. "We did all right, didn't we?" Ranger looked at him with those calm, loyal eyes. The same eyes from patrol nights, from silent mornings, from the first snow, from the storm, from every year after. Ethan felt the answer without needing a sound. They had done more than all right. They had built a life. They had built a shelter. They had built a reminder strong enough to outlast the laughter. In the seasons that followed, people would still tell the story of the Navy SEAL and the cabin on Carter Ridge. Some would tell it around fireplaces when the snow began to fall. Some would tell it to children who thought small things could not matter. Some would tell it to neighbors who judged too quickly or prepared too late. The details would shift, as stories do. The storm would grow larger in memory. The walk through the snow would sound farther. Ranger would become almost legendary, the old German shepherd who led people home through a whiteout. But Ethan knew the real story was not about a storm being survived. It was about a man who thought he had stepped away from the world, only to discover the world still needed the best parts of him. It was about a town that learned humility before it learned gratitude. It was about a dog who understood that loyalty means staying close when fear makes people unsteady. And it was about a cabin people mocked because they measured it with their eyes before they understood the heart that built it. The last time Ethan stood on the porch during the first snowfall of a new winter, Ranger leaned against his leg, older and slower, but still present. Down in the valley, the town lights glowed through the cold. Somewhere, Buck was checking on his mother before the roads iced over. Lily was working a night shift at the hospital, calming frightened patients with the same steady voice she had heard in the cabin. Claire was closing her barn doors and counting every animal twice. Families had blankets in their cars, batteries in their drawers, and neighbors on their call lists. The storm had ended years ago. The lesson had not. Ethan watched snow collect on the railing. Once, that kind of quiet would have made him feel separate from everyone else. Now it felt like connection stretched gently across the miles. He placed his hand on Ranger's head and looked at the small cabin behind him. Its windows glowed. Its chimney breathed. Its walls stood firm, not because they were large, but because they had been built with intention. People had called it foolish. They had called him lost. They had thought the dog was only a companion. But winter has a way of revealing what summer lets people ignore. Under pressure, weak things crack and true things hold. That cabin held. Ethan held. Ranger held. And because they did, others learned to hold one another a little better too. If this story touched something in you, tell us in the comments who came to mind while you listened. Maybe it was someone quiet who helped you when you needed it. Maybe it was a loyal dog who stayed close through a hard season. Maybe it was a place that looked small to others but meant safety to you. And if you believe stories like Ethan and Ranger's still matter, subscribe and join us for more reminders of courage, loyalty, and kindness. Because sometimes the strongest shelter is not the biggest house on the hill. Sometimes it is a little cabin in the trees, built by a man no one understood, guarded by a dog who never gave up, waiting with a warm light in the window for anyone humble enough to knock.